listening to the Get Out of Debt Guy show. I'm Steve Rhode, the old Get Out of Debt Guy, and with me as always is Damon Day, the new Get Out of Debt Guy. You can find Damon at DamonDay.com, and you can find me in retirement.
He's in retirement selling stuff on
That's
Amazon.
what I'm doing. I'm not dealing with debt. But Damon, you had
And he's loving every minute of it.
I actually am. Damon, you had a burning topic that you wanted to talk about today. It's a good one. What is it?
It is a good one. It kind of encompasses inflation and the cost of living and how screwed up everything is getting and how it's okay to give yourself permission to tell the bank, sorry, I ain't making the payment this month.
Well, inflation is, oh my God, you would think that it's such an easy topic, but it's not. It's another one of those things that people hear about it in the news and they make assumptions and you hear one slant on it and one, different one on another one. And so it becomes a good buzzword, but it does affect families. Now, right now, inflation feels pretty high, doesn't it?
Yeah. And again, it doesn't matter what you call it. And like you said, it's kind of complicated because there's all kinds of ways to look at it. But the bottom line is stuff costs a lot more than it used to.
Well, here's the interesting thing. I'm the facts guy, right? And it definitely...
You and your pesky facts.
I know. It definitely feels like things are more expensive. I mean, especially things that impact us, that we talk about, like fast food and eating out and, groceries and things like that. And then become certainly buzzwords. But here's an interesting little fact is in 2023, the inflation rate in the United States was 4.98%. It was higher. That was like the highest point following the pandemic. In 2024, it's 3.5%. And one of the things driving the inflation rate in both years has been the cost of food. Now, here's what's really interesting when we talk about inflation. I am old enough now to remember the 1980s when our inflation rate was almost 15%. It was pretty damn high. And a lot of that was because of the price of oil and economic recovery and all that. But if we go back to like 2009, the inflation rate was minus 0.36%. And then it was 3.16 in 2011. In 2020, it was 1.8%. And in 2021, it was almost 5%. So since the 1980s, the inflation rate has been, pretty steady. But right now, I think people are really getting pinched for a number of reasons. And while it might not necessarily be inflation, they're certainly feeling more economic pressure. For example, I heard this statistic recently that the price of a house, just as a rule of thumb, will double about every 10 years. But housing prices have been increasing considerably, and in some places they've been doubling every 5 to 7 years. And a lot of that has to do with some of the many factors that contribute to inflation and not just general inflation. But regardless, people feel like they're getting squeezed.
Yeah, and I know you like to say you're the facts guy and inflation rate is 4 point this and 3 point that and overall this. And I say I don't even buy any of those numbers anyway. I mean, you can grab your own data and make your own conclusions. I'm just going by here's what I observe when I'm out in the real world, and shit costs a lot more money right now. And, I'm looking at things like housing, cars, food, just the things that people have to buy, regardless of what the government, it's only 3 points, like they're celebrating. Oh, it's only 4%. It's down. Yeah, because it was even worse the year before. But all inflation is a tax, right? It's basically the dollars that you're making are going to buy less and less stuff. That's all it is. So what happens is people tend to use credit cards to fill in that gap, right? When the cost of living is rising faster than their incomes are rising, they tend to like get more and more stuff gets put on the credit cards, which is one of the big reasons why we're at all-time credit card debt levels.
And you know what? That's funny because that's
one
of the things that increases inflation. So, we're almost doing it. We're almost doing it to ourselves because one of the factors, there are 7 basic factors that cause inflation. And one of them is when people expect or want something, they expect future prices are going to be higher or they want it right now. And so they rush out and purchase it, which drives the prices up. And so we're caught in this never-ending loop because there are other things that we have no control over when it comes to inflation, like global, events or other government policies or supply chain disruptions. And all of these things lead to the increased price. But I mean, it's like housing. Trying to buy a new home is, I don't know how people are doing it now, but a lot of that has to do with just supply and demand, right? There aren't enough affordable homes for people to buy. And in the last, 5 years, 10 years maybe, more corporations have been buying. I've got right near me, I have 2 complete neighborhoods of single family homes that are all owned by a corporation and they're all rentals. And so people are going to be they're going to be stuck renting as long as they live there and not be able to afford a down payment. Here's another interesting thing about a house is that, right now, the average single family home in America is $492,000. That's across, rural, urban, everywhere. $492,000. And by 2044, in 20 years, the average single family home is going to be almost $1 million.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you get to the point where the starter homes are $1 million. But, I was looking at some stats too, and I was looking in California.
Yeah.
Right. And because that's where I grew up. In California, in 1985, 87, when I was a kid, there was a headline. I was doing some research in Google, and the headline was median home prices in California top 120,000 for the first time ever.
And that was outlandish.
When I was a kid.
Yeah.
That was like, it was topped 120.
Yeah.
Now, today, median, as of last year's data, median home prices in California were like $750,000.
Yeah.
Just in the span of 40 years, and it's crazy. But when you talk about, housing inflation, it comes back down to, again, you said there's a lot of factors and you're right. But one of those factors, and a big factor, is access to money, right? Mm-hmm. That's the reason why colleges are so damn expensive these days, right? Easy access to money. Sign here, get a whole bunch of money. Houses, lower interest rates. Even now when people go, oh my God, the interest rates are horrible. Historically, they're not that horrible. They're still fairly low right now. But when you have the entire population that has easy access to money, if you look back in the 1980s,
just look at the housing crash, right? Everyone in Vegas owned 5 homes because banks were just lending money like crazy and they couldn't afford it.
So this kind of ties into my overall theme when it's like, hey, Mr. Morgan, screw you. Check's not in the mail. I mean, and again, I'm not saying this is some conspiracy theory, but when you really start to break it down, the banks are a big part of the overall problem of why people don't have enough to, live a middle-class lifestyle like their parents had, 20, 30 years ago. Even if you're adjusted for inflation, making the same amount of money, adjusted for inflation, it's still a lot harder to have that middle-class lifestyle. And a lot of it is when the society is able to easily access capital on credit cards, on, mortgage loans, whatever it is, that is a big contributing factor to inflation, right? If you have millions and millions of people that can go out and buy a house only because they have easy access to capital that maybe wasn't available 20 years ago, they're probably going to go out and buy houses. That's going to drive up the price, right? You've also got the issue of the dual income families.
Right.
You start looking at a lot of, what was the median income in the 1980s and what was the median income today? A lot of what you'll notice, most of the stats that you get now are not individuals. They always talk about household. And when you're trying to compare household median income today to household median income in the 1980s, how many more households today are dual income than households in the 1980s? Much, much more. So now you've got two parents trying to both work to try to keep the same lifestyle that your parents maybe had growing up with only one spouse working. And that contributes to inflation as well.
Yeah, which leads to things like eating out more often, or, DoorDash, or, whatever, because we lead busy lives, and the increased cost of daycare. And it puts a real pinch on families. Now, here's another thing that unconsciously puts a pinch on families is when there are lots of behavioral economic theories. One of my favorite is a theory called the bandwagon effect, which says that you are more likely to unconsciously spend by the group of peers that you identify with. You will tend to purchase more to fall in with your crowd than maybe you could actually afford. So there are a lot of things that cause people to spend more than they can really afford. It's not just one thing, but I agree with you that as long as banks are making easy money available, here's what happens. The banks have all these sophisticated, actuaries and accountants and mathematicians and everything, and they're determining what their risk is with lending and how much they're going to get on return and all that other stuff. And they make this easy money available, and then they blame you. They blame the consumer for taking out the loan and not being able to pay it. But who knew there was a pandemic coming?
Yeah. Well, and not only that, I mean, and what you just said is essentially, to paraphrase what you said, is, keeping up with the Joneses, right? We tend to spend, like the people that you hang around with. But and it's not just like, well, you didn't have to buy as fancy of a house, or you didn't have to buy as fancy of a car. But I needed to buy a gallon of freaking milk, bro. Right. And so, and again, I'm not saying, it's this big conspiracy, so they're screwing you, so therefore you shouldn't worry about screwing them. And I'm not saying that, but I'm basically saying, if you get into a point where you got your credit cards maxed out because you've just been trying to, live your life the way you've been living it, and you got to take some personal responsibility for it. But if you get to that point, it's okay to give yourself permission to take a step back and say, wait a minute, what path am I going down? Maybe I need to do something different than just keep giving them $3,000 a month for minimum payments on all these things. I'm maxed out on all this stuff. It might be okay if I don't send a payment in, whether I'm going to go bankrupt on this and wipe it out. The system that you're in right now is set up to make it very difficult to succeed if you're not paying attention.
Well,
it's set up
set up to
you can't
for
pay your
people to
mortgage.
fail.
Here's a little personal loan you can grab. Yeah, here's a little loan. Get this. And then before you know it, you're $100,000 in debt and you're shelling out $25,000 a year in interest.
Well,
just
when you
trying
think
to
about
keep
it,
up with that $100,000 a year in debt.
You are set up to fail from the very beginning, because when you take out a loan, it doesn't say like, hey, if there's a global pandemic or a flood or something like that, you can skip the payment that month. No, it says you have to make a payment every single month until this debt is completely paid off. Life doesn't work like that. And so when you find yourself in a situation for whatever reason, people assign too much moral value or morality or whatever to these situations. Like, I'm a failure because I can't pay my bill. You know what? It is what it is. And all we can do is do better moving forward and stop feeling guilty and trying to repair the past. And so I think what you're saying, Damon, is that sometimes people need to make a hard choice and determine how they're going to deal with their finances. Over the years, my God, over the years, I've had enough families tell me, I can't cut back because I won't take my child out of private school, or I can't cut out the horse riding lessons, or, you had a client once whose wife kept buying, I don't know, was it like $10,000 handbags or something like, and
That poor guy, I can't even remember his name because it was like over 10 years ago, but I've used that story so much. I feel kind of bad, but
yeah,
I mean, I never use his name or anything, but yeah, because that one was just such a shocking, he's, hiring me to help him negotiate this $100,000 in credit card debt that he couldn't afford.
yeah,
And he hires me and he sends me over his bank statements. And the first thing I see is a very recent purchase of a $10,000 purse or something it was Neiman Marcus or Macy's or
yeah,
something. And this was
yeah.
a purchase that was made after he'd hired me. Like we were already figuring out this plan. And I had called him back and I said, "Hey, what's this?" "Oh yeah, my wife bought a bag or whatever." And he wanted me to negotiate that account. I said, "She's going to have to return that purse." And he was like dumbfounded, like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yes, I can't negotiate an account and plead hardship when you literally a couple of weeks ago just bought a $10,000 purse. That's not a necessity. Right. It's not eggs and bread there." And I'm like, "She's either going to have to return that or I cannot help you with that account."
Yeah. And didn't he say,
at the end of it,
she's not going to return it?
Yeah. So basically, and I never talked to the wife. She didn't want to get on the phone with me. And then so the next phone call we had he was like, "Well, we really appreciate your help, but we're going to go in a different direction." I said, "Okay, right. Sorry." So, hey, I'm really good, but I can't apparently help everybody.
I remember 30 years ago.
Gotta have that purse.
Clients ever went through their budget and it was really close, and they were super motivated to get going. We're going to cut the payments, get you on track and everything. And I said, "Well, let's start this week." And they said, "We can't. We're going on vacation for 2 weeks."
Yeah, well, that tracks. You made a good point the other night we were talking, and you'd made a point that there's been a big mindset shift in the population as well around spending habits and things like that. Like you talked about, these days, it's normal to be like, I want a hamburger. I'm going to DoorDash that hamburger. Like not even, it's like gone above and beyond, back 30 years ago, going out to eat was a special treat for the family. Didn't happen very often. And then we morphed into going out to eat was normal. And then we morphed into, I don't even want to go out to eat, but I want to pay even more to have it brought to me. Like we've had this like shift in just the attitudes about debt, like credit cards, right? We didn't have the type of credit card debt that 40 years ago that we had now, because people's attitudes towards getting into credit card debt for something you couldn't afford was very different than the kind of relaxed nature of like, hey, it's no big deal. Put it on a credit card, right? Pay it off later.
Yeah.
So, part of the challenge that people face these days is trying to be frugal in a frugalist society. It's easier to keep up with the Joneses when the Joneses all want to be frugal. But when the Joneses are like, DoorDash 3 meals a day and let me roll a $100,000 Tahoe, a freaking Tahoe, $100,000, it's hard, not to say it's impossible, but it does make it harder especially when it seems like everybody else has all of this stuff. And the reality is most everybody else is also putting it on credit cards.
So I remember when I worked at IBM, we had a cafeteria there and everybody went to the cafeteria for lunch. We all bought our lunch every day. And anybody who brought their lunch, the assumption was, what's wrong with Bob? Is he struggling?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Even just spending at work, there are certainly easy ways to cut back. And this is why I hate budgets and I hate telling people to cut back anything if they feel that it's a hardship, unless they're willing to do it. But here's an interesting fact is the typical family today spends $5,000 a month. And the most expensive thing that they spend on is housing, transportation, food, and then healthcare. So $5,000 a month. The average Social Security payment today is $1,900. So,
yeah.
And this gets to what you were saying about we just need to deal with it one way or another, is because if you're spending this way now, you're not willing to just start over and deal with the debt and talk to Damon and come up with a plan on how to do better moving forward, how are you going to carry all of that debt with you towards retirement and live on $1,900 a month? You're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah. I mean, if you've got 50 grand in debt right now and you're making the minimum payments and you're optimistic because everybody's I'm going to get a better job. I'm going to get a raise. Prices are going to come down. I'm going to be able to snowball this thing or whatever. I'm going to beans and rice my way out of this with my tiny feet. I mean,
Yep.
if you're doing that every year that goes by that you're not making a concrete decision, putting together a plan to deal with that. And I don't care if it's bankruptcy. I don't care if it's settling the debt. I don't care if it's negotiating the interest rates down to nothing, getting into a credit counseling type plan or what. It's got to be something, because just continuing to carry that 50 grand, hoping things are going to get better, is going to cost you $10,000, $12,000 a year. And as Steve was alluding to, when you talk about Social Security, what would happen if you took, and that's just 10 to 12 grand a year in interest. That's not even counting trying to pay down that principal.
Right.
What would your life look like 20 years from now if you could take that 10 grand a year and stick it in a retirement account for 10 to 20 years?
Yeah. I mean, right? I know the math
because that's what it's that's what it's costing you.
Yeah. I mean, if you're in your 40s or early 50s and you just say, okay, I'm going to do better moving forward, I'm going to deal with this mess right now, you are literally going to have more than $1 million in a retirement fund, because it's the value of magnifying your money over time that's most important. But if you say, I'm not going to deal with this now, I'm just going to keep doing the same thing month after month, you're going to retire broke. And I don't know what kind of subsidized housing you're going to live in. And I'm not trying to be too hyperbolic or this is just reality. This is just math.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's why, when you look at, I don't want to file bankruptcy, or, I don't want to miss a payment and negotiate the principal. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. But what I tell clients is, look, let's just look at all the options that you have right now. And then you could decide what's right for you. But what I find I have a lot of clients that first get on the phone with me and they say, I don't want to do bankruptcy. And again, I'm not a bankruptcy proponent where every client I have is, we'll just file bankruptcy. It's easy. And, that's one option. But you'd be surprised how many clients that when we first start talking say, bankruptcy is not an option. I don't like it. I don't want to do it. And as we go through all these different options and we start running the numbers, and this is what your life will look like over the next 5 or 10 years if we do this. This is what your life will look like over the next 5 or 10 years if we do this, or we do this, or we do this. And then they really start laying it out and looking at the numbers. You'd be surprised how many of them come around to, you know what? I was really afraid of, missing a payment before. Now I can't wait to miss a payment because I can see what that money is going to be able to do for me, even if it's a bankruptcy, right? And I mean, and think about it. If you had 50 grand in debt and I waved a magic wand and it just wiped it out magically with bankruptcy, whatever. And I'm not saying bankruptcy is right for everybody, but now all of a sudden you've been shelling out $2,000 a month out of your check, barely making it. The reason why you're probably in the 50 grand is because you've been having to use those cards to cover the gap, to get by every month. Now you're getting maxed out. You're not sure what to do. You got $2 grand a month going out the door just to keep the cards current. That's all it's doing. You end up filing bankruptcy. And now all of a sudden, next month, you have $2 grand that you don't know what to do with because you're used to having to pay these cards and these personal loans. And now that obligation is gone. And you're like, oh my gosh, I feel rich immediately. Like you're going to feel like, look at all this cash. Wow, what can I do?
You're not just recovering $2 grand a month. If right now things are tight and you're unable to participate in your 401k plan at work and your employer is matching 50% of your you're giving away that free 50% of that money too, because you're just limping along. Here's the bottom line for me, Damon, is there are lots of things that cause people to have financial pressure in their lives. We can blame it on inflation. We can blame it on the Joneses. We can blame it on all sorts of things. But the reality is, if you feel financial pressure right now, you feel like things are not as good as they should be, I somehow have to turn this ship around. Well, this is why you don't need to rush out and sign up in some program. You need to deliberately investigate and research What are your options moving forward? And then make an informed, logical, intelligent decision.
Yeah. And especially, if you're looking at, well, I don't want to do anything drastic. I don't want to file bankruptcy. I don't want to settle my debt because it's going to involve, a hit to my credit. And it's like, what's the worst thing that can happen? You have bad credit for a couple of years, but you have a good retirement? Or is the good credit you have or semi-good credit you have, because most people struggling with debt have crap credit anyway. They haven't missed any payments, but their score is 620. And they're like, well, I'm holding on. For what? What are you going to do with a 620 credit score and maxed out credit cards? What are you holding on to? But is that worth a $1,900 a month Social Security check, and that's all you have to live on when you're 70 years old? Because guess what? Prices aren't coming down overall. If you think, fast forward 20 years, Steve, and we'll be talking about the good old days of 2024 when I could get milk for only $5, right? A gallon of gas only costs $4. Man, I miss those days, right? 20 years from now, we're going to be talking about, wow, you have access. You found a home that's listed for under $1 million. Does it have a roof? Cool. Let's go look at it.
Oh my God. Yeah. So if you are feeling any sorts of financial pressure, or you think this is a pretty interesting topic, you'd like to explore it a little bit more, you can always reach out to Damon at damonday.com. And again, I'm staying in retirement, so you can reach me here on the podcast. That's it. Well, Damon, let's end it there.
Yeah, let's end it with, and if you need extra money, go over to our Penny Stupid Project YouTube channel. We got 720, I think we're at like 726 subscribers now. We're pushing that, trying to get to 1,000. You want some extra side hustle ideas? We go out there and figure it out for you so we can show you how to make some extra money. Pay off those credit cards.
All right, Damon, till next time, I'll see ya.
Peace.